The first thing to die was the light. Emergency klaxons blared, casting the bridge of the UES Odyssey in strobes of hellish red. The second thing to die was the sound. Not silence, but its opposite, a psychic pressure that crushed all noise, leaving only the scream of tearing metal and the frantic, useless thud of his own heart against his ribs. Lieutenant Commander Kaelen Ryker dragged himself up, using the shattered command console for leverage. His vision swam. Across the bridge, Ensign Calloway was pinned against the main view screen, which now showed only a swirling mass of silver and black. Biomechanical tendrils, thin as wires and hard as diamond, had pierced the ship's hull as if it were paper. They were wrapped around Calloway's limbs, not crushing, but merging. Kael, Calloway's mouth moved, but no sound came out. The psychic pressure stole it. Instead, the voice bloomed inside Kael's mind, a frantic whisper of pure terror. "It's inside me. Oh God, it's in my head." Kael scrambled for a plasma cutter, his hands shaking. The silver tendrils pulsed with a soft internal light. Where they touched Calloway's uniform, the fabric dissolved. Where they touched his skin, they sank in, seamlessly blending flesh and alien metal. Kael raised the cutter, but Calloway's eyes, wide with horror, suddenly focused on him. They were no longer the familiar blue he'd known. They were shimmering, turning the color of liquid mercury. The whisper in Kael's mind changed. It was no longer just Calloway's. It was a chorus. A million voices screaming as one. Then a single cold thought, clear as a bell, wearing Calloway's mental voice like a mask. "It sees through me, Kael. Run!" That was the last thing Ensign Calloway ever said. The light in his eyes vanished, replaced by a flat, silver sheen. The tendrils contracted, and he was pulled, silently, into the swirling mass beyond the viewport. The last thing Kael saw was the ghost of a face in the silver, its mouth open in a scream that would echo in his skull forever. The silence of the Concord high chamber was as absolute and oppressive as the psychic scream had been. It was a sterile, calculated quiet designed to awe and intimidate. Kaelen Ryker sat in the lone chair at the center of the vast circular room. The chair was uncomfortably soft, a stark contrast to the harsh metal he had been living on for the past 3 weeks. His United Earth Systems uniform was torn and stained, a smudge of gray in a sea of pristine alien majesty. Around and above him sat the arbiters of his fate, the Galactic Concord, beings ancient beyond human comprehension. At the head of the assembly, on a dais that seemed to float on nothing, sat Chairman Zilks. His people, the Hadari, were insectoid, his form a collection of sharp, chitinous angles. His multifaceted eyes betrayed no emotion as he regarded Kael with the detached curiosity of a scientist studying a microbe. To his right sat Ambassador Talis of the Machar. Her race was feline, built with the coiled grace of a predator. Even in her formal diplomatic robes, she looked more like a warrior than a politician, her golden eyes missing no detail of Kael's haggard appearance. She leaned forward slightly, a stark contrast to the rigid posture of the others. "Lieutenant Commander Ryker." Chairman Zilks's voice was a dry, synthesized rasp, perfectly translated by the small disc on Kael's collar. "You have made a series of extraordinary claims. You allege your vessel, the UES Odyssey, was destroyed without provocation by an unknown biological aggressor in the uncharted Epsilon Indies sector." Kael's throat was dry. He took a sip of water from the glass that had been provided. It tasted like nothing. "They weren't claims, Chairman. They were my report. A report lacking any verifiable data, as your ship's black box was conveniently destroyed," Zilks stated, the word conveniently hanging in the air. "There wasn't much left of the ship to have a black box," Kael shot back, his voice rougher than he intended. He forced himself to calm down. Sarcasm wouldn't save his species. He had to be clinical. He had to be believable. He had held back the worst of it, the assimilation, the psychic violation. They wouldn't understand it. They'd call it delusion, trauma-induced fantasy. So he had given them a version they could digest, predators, a swarm. "This species, which you have named the Chrysalis," Talis interjected, her voice a low, resonant purr, "you say they disabled your vessel with an energy weapon before boarding? They fired a single pulse that took our systems offline. Then they just came through the hull," Kael said, the memory of Calloway flashing in his mind. He pushed it down. They move like a swarm, but they're coordinated. Tactical. They didn't just destroy us. They dismantled us. Talis's whiskers twitched. A fascinating and deeply disturbing count. A species that combines swarm tactics with strategic intelligence is a threat of the highest magnitude. It is an isolated incident in an uncharted sector, Zilks countered flatly. The vessel was operating beyond its designated patrol route, in violation of its own directives. They were answering a distress signal, Chairman, Kael said through gritted teeth. A human distress signal. A fake one, as it turned out. A lure. Zilks made a soft chittering sound, the Hadari equivalent of a dismissive wave. A commendable, if primitive, instinct. The matter has been discussed. Kael sat in silence as they debated his fate and the fate of humanity in their calm, ancient languages. He didn't need the translator to understand the gist. He could see it in their postures. Ambassador Talis spoke with passion, her hands gesturing sharply. She argued for a full-scale expeditionary force, for reconnaissance, for understanding the enemy. A predator that learns is a threat that grows, her translated voice echoed in Kael's ear. To ignore it is to invite it to our own doorstep. Containment through ignorance is a failing strategy. We must know what this Chrysalis is, then Zilks spoke. His voice was monotone, but it carried the immense weight of his authority. He spoke of protocol, of stability, of the Concord's prime directive of non-interference with emergent species races like humanity, who had only just stumbled into the galactic arena. The risk calculus is clear, Zilks's voice droned on, to sanction a full-scale military response based on the uncorroborated testimony of a single, traumatized survivor from a pre-FTL emergent world would be an act of profound irresponsibility. It would risk the stability of the 12,000 worlds under our protection. The cost of one primitive planet cannot be weighed against the peace of the galaxy. Primitive planet. The words felt like a physical blow. After what felt like an eternity, the debate subsided. A silent consensus was reached. Zilks focused his multifaceted eyes back on Kael. The Concord has reached its decision, the dry voice announced. The Epsilon Indi sector will be designated a Level 9 quarantine zone, with all travel into or out of the system strictly forbidden. The species you have encountered, the Chrysalis, will be contained. Kael felt a cold dread wash over him. Contained? They have faster-than-light capabilities. They have our navigational charts. They know where Earth is. The galaxy is vast. The probability of them locating a single specific system among billions is statistically negligible, Zilks said, as if closing a file. As for your world, Earth, the Concord will extend its protection by enforcing this quarantine. Nothing gets in, and nothing gets out. It took a moment for the meaning to sink in. A prison sentence for his entire species. And me? Kael's voice was a hoarse whisper. You are the sole witness to a Level 9 threat. Your knowledge is a potential contaminant, Zilks stated. You will be granted comfortable accommodation here on Concord Station as our protected guest. For your own safety and for the greater good of the galactic community. The finality of it was suffocating. They were going to let the Chrysalis come. They were going to let humanity be erased, and they were going to keep him here to watch it happen from a gilded cage. A raw, humorless laugh escaped Kael's lips. It sounded ugly in the perfect silence of the chamber. A protected guest, he echoed, shaking his head as he pushed himself to his feet. Is that what you call a witness to a scheduled execution? Two towering Concord sentinels, silent beings of light and force, moved to his sides. He saw Ambassador Talis look away, a flicker of something shame perhaps, or a warrior's disgust in her golden eyes. Zilks remained utterly impassive. Your perspective is noted, Lieutenant Commander. The decision is final. As the sentinels escorted him from the chamber, the great doors began to slide shut behind him, sealing him off from the beings who had just condemned his world. He was alone, a ghost haunted by the echoes of his crew, and now the premonition of the screams of all humanity. The quarters they gave Kael were a masterpiece of silent contempt. They were spacious, impeccably clean, and offered a breathtaking view of the star-dusted nebula beyond the station's viewport. The nutrient synthesizer could replicate over 1,000 dishes from across the Concord, each one perfectly bland. The sonic shower cleansed his skin, but did nothing to wash away the grime he felt on his soul. It was a cage, not of bars, but of luxurious, soul-crushing indifference. For the first 2 cycles, he allowed the despair to wash over him. He was a ghost, haunting a tomb of his own making, a witness to a genocide that hadn't happened yet. But humanity hadn't survived ice ages, plagues, and its own self-destructive tendencies by giving up. The despair burned away, leaving behind the cold, hard anger that had kept him alive in the wreckage of the Odyssey. He turned to the only tool he had, Mindshine, the room's integrated data terminal. It was heavily firewalled, offering him access only to the Concord's public library, a sanitized, billion-entry encyclopedia of their glorious, peaceful history. But it also granted him access to low-level, non-secure station schematics, power grid layouts, environmental control cycling, maintenance schedules. He studied them for days, not looking for an escape route that was impossible. He was looking for a weakness in their philosophy, and he found it. The Concord was a civilization built on millennia of unchallenged logic and order. Their systems were perfect, efficient, and predictable. Their logic was a fortress, and every fortress has a flaw. Their systems were designed to counter logical threats. They could stop a brute force cyber attack, a targeted virus, or a system intrusion. But they were utterly unprepared for something chaotic, something that didn't follow their rules. Something like the Chrysalis, something like a desperate human. He had a new plan. It was a long shot, a whisper in a hurricane, but it was better than suffocating in silence. He needed to talk to Talis, not as a prisoner begging for help, but as a peer offering a weapon. His fingers flew across the holographic interface of the nutrient synthesizer's control panel. He bypassed the food selection menus and accessed the machine's internal power diagnostics. Finding the primary energy conduit was easy. Creating a precise, minor short circuit, just enough to trigger a maintenance alert without causing a real fire, was harder. But his training as an engineer served him well. A moment later, a query popped up on his main terminal. Alert, power fluctuation detected in Unit 734 Delta. Nutrient synthesizer offline. Please submit diagnostic log for review. This was his chance. He appended his own diagnostic log to the maintenance request. It was a string of nonsense code, a digital smokescreen, but buried within it, he embedded a specific reference to a mature military doctrine he'd read about in the public library. Doctrine 7, the unseen claw, a strategy for dealing with threats that defied conventional analysis. It was a signal only she or another mature officer might recognize. At the very end of the data packet, he added a single uncoded line. Evidence, not testimony. Private audience required. He sent the message. And then he waited, the silence of his cage more deafening than ever. 26 hours passed. Kael had almost given up hope when the door to his quarters chimed. It wasn't a maintenance drone. It was 2 of the same Concord sentinels who had escorted him from the high chamber. They stood impassively, their featureless helmets betraying nothing. One of them gestured for him to come. They didn't lead him to an interrogation room or a transport shuttle. They guided him through the silent, pristine corridors to a sector of the station he hadn't seen before. It was darker here, the lights dimmed. They stopped before a heavy door that hissed open to reveal a decommissioned astrometrics observatory. The chamber was a vast, dark sphere with a star map on its dome ceiling switched off. The only light came from a single panoramic window, looking out at the distant, shimmering arms of a spiral galaxy. Ambassador Talis stood before the window, her back to him. She was no longer in her formal diplomatic robes. She wore a simple, dark, and functional uniform that bespoke her warrior heritage. The sentinels posted themselves outside, the door sliding shut, leaving Kael alone with her. "You have taken an incredible risk, Commander," she said, her voice low and devoid of its earlier purr. She turned, her golden eyes intense. "For both of us. This had better be worth it." "It is," Kael said simply. He didn't waste time on pleasantries or arguments. He knew he had one shot. He pulled a small, scorched device from his pocket. It was the hardened memory core from his flight suit's internal recorder. The Concord questioned my report because it lacked data. They were wrong. He held it out to her. This is the emergency log from my suit. It records 30 seconds of continuous audio and bioneural feedback directly from the user's cerebral cortex. Tallis looked at the device, then at him, her expression cautious. Neural feedback can be influenced by trauma. It is not considered empirical evidence. What's on here isn't my trauma, Kael said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. It's theirs. He activated the core. There was no screen. He had configured it for audio-only playback. He didn't need to describe the sound. He watched Talis's reaction. As the recording played, her stoic, diplomatic composure shattered. The fur on her neck bristled. A low, guttural growl, a sound of pure primal fury, escaped her throat. Her hands, previously clasped behind her back, clenched into fists, and the tips of razor-sharp claws extended from her fingers, glinting in the dim starlight. Her pupils dilated, her warrior instincts screaming at the profane wrongness of the sound pouring from the device, a chorus of psychic agony, of souls being unmade. When it ended, the silence that returned was heavy, violated. Tallis stood frozen for a long moment, her breathing ragged. She had spent centuries in council chambers, debating points of law and galactic treaties. This was something else entirely. This was an obscenity. Finally, she spoke, her voice strained. By the first clans, what have they done? Well, that, Kael said, his own voice unsteady, is what I tried to tell them. That's what's coming for my world. The ambassador closed her eyes, her inner conflict warring across her features. Then she opened them, and the diplomat was gone. Only the warrior remained. The Concord has grown old and timid, Commander. It fears disruption more than it values justice. It has chosen to blind itself. She took a deep breath. And I cannot, in good conscience, be a party to its willful ignorance. She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. My honor as a Concord ambassador forbids me from opening your door. But my honor as a Machar warrior demands I show you where the key is. She produced a small crystalline data slate and pressed it into his hand. This contains the complete schematics and entry protocols for my personal courier ship, the Silent Claw. It is docked in Bay Zeta 7. It is the fastest, most advanced ship of its class. She looked him dead in the eye. In 32 hours, there will be a full shift change for the station's security detail. During that change, a power surge from a passing freighter will cause a system-wide diagnostic reset. For exactly 5 minutes, internal security sensors in the diplomatic docking sector will be unreliable. It was more than he could have ever hoped for. Thank you, he breathed, the words feeling inadequate. Do not thank me yet, she said, her expression grim. I am giving you a chance, not a guarantee. You will be hunted by the finest security forces in the galaxy. If you are caught, I will deny everything. You will be on your own. She turned back to the star-filled window. You came to us with a warning. Now take this chance and deliver it yourself. Make it count, Commander Ryker. Show the galaxy what a species with nothing left to lose is capable of. The pact was sealed. Not with a handshake or a treaty, but with a shared terrible truth in the dark heart of an enemy station. The 32 hours that followed his meeting with Tallis were the longest of Kael's life. He forced himself to eat, to sleep, and to go through the motions of a compliant prisoner. Any deviation from his routine would draw suspicion. Inside, every nerve was screaming. He sat in his silent cage, watching the station's chronometer, counting down the seconds to a plan that felt more like a prayer than a strategy. He had spent hours modifying the power unit from the sonic shower, turning it into a crude, single-use electromagnetic pulse device. It was his only key, his only weapon. The moment came without fanfare. The lights in his quarters flickered once, twice, then stabilized. The power surge Tallis had promised. His 5-minute window was open. Action replaced anxiety. He ripped the panel from the wall beside his door, exposing the circuitry for the magnetic lock. The 2 Concord sentinels outside wouldn't have registered the flicker as anything more than a routine anomaly. He pressed his makeshift EMP against the wires and activated it. There was a sharp crack and a smell of ozone. The lock on his door sparked and died. The lights on the sentinels' helmets flickered and went out as their short-range comms and local sensors were fried. Kael slammed his shoulder into the door. It burst open, The two sentinels were momentarily stunned, their systems rebooting. It was the only opening he would get. He moved with the brutal efficiency of his Special Forces training. He lunged for the first guard, striking the nerve cluster at the base of its neck with the heel of his hand. The sentinel crumpled without a sound. The second was already turning, raising its pulse rifle, but Kael was faster. He ducked under its arm, spun behind it, and locked his forearm around its throat, cutting off the flow of oxygen to its alien lungs. A few seconds later, it went limp. He gently lowered the second guard to the floor. He hadn't killed them. They were just soldiers following orders. He relieved one of them of its sidearm, a sleek, non-lethal pulse stunner, and checked its charge. Full. He clipped it to his belt. The corridor was pristine, white, and utterly silent. According to the schematics on Talis's data slate, the diplomatic wing's internal sensors were offline, but the main station AI, the Nexus, would register the pressure change from his open door within the next 90 seconds. He was already behind schedule. He sprinted. Kael ignored the main corridors, the silent moving walkways, and the grand atriums. Talis's slate guided him to a small, unassuming panel marked with maintenance symbols. He wrenched it open and plunged into the station's metallic guts. The maintenance shafts were a different world. It was dark, cramped, and smelled of ozone and recycled air. The steady, low-frequency hum of the station's life support systems vibrated through the floor plates. He navigated the maze of pipes and conduits, his only guide the glowing map on his data slate. Suddenly, the ambient lighting in the shaft shifted from a dim white to a pulsing, urgent red. A calm female voice echoed through the station, devoid of panic, making it all the more terrifying. Security alert. Containment breach in diplomatic quadrant. Level 1 lockdown in effect. All personnel to alert status. His 5-minute window had slammed shut. The Nexus knew he was out. A new sound joined the hum of the station, a high-pitched whine coming from down the corridor. He flattened himself into an alcove just as 3 security drones zipped past. They were spheres of polished chrome, propelled by silent anti-gravity emitters, their single red optical sensors sweeping the darkness. They were hunting him. He couldn't outrun them. He had to outthink them. He raced down a perpendicular tunnel, the drones close behind. Up ahead, a massive coolant pipe ran along the ceiling, slick with condensation. He aimed the pulse stunner not at the drones, but at the joint valve above them. The blast of energy caused the valve to rupture. A cloud of supercooled, pressurized gas erupted, instantly filling the corridor with a dense, freezing fog. The drone's optical sensors were useless. They slowed, disoriented. Kael didn't wait. He scrambled up a service ladder, moving towards the coordinates for docking bay Zeta 7. He burst through a floor grate, finding himself on a high observation gallery. Below him, the docking bay was cavernous, bathed in a cold blue light. And there it was, the Silent Claw. It was nothing like the functional, blocky ships of the Earth fleet. It was a vessel of predatory elegance, its hull a matte black that seemed to drink the light, its lines sharp and angled like a shard of obsidian. It looked like a hunting cat ready to pounce. He scrambled down the gantry, his boots clanging on the metal walkway. The moment he set foot on the ship's boarding ramp, the main bay doors began to thunder shut, massive plates of steel grinding together. They were trying to seal him in. He sprinted into the cockpit and slammed his hand on the ramp control. It hissed shut behind him. He jammed Talis's data slate into the main console. The ship, which had been dark and dormant, came to life instantly, recognizing the ambassador's priority override codes. Mashar script glowed on the screens before being overwritten by standard Concord glyphs. Launch sequence initiated, the ship's computer announced. Through the cockpit's viewport, he could see the bay doors closing fast. Outside, armed security shuttles were converging on their position. Come on, he muttered, pushing the thrusters to maximum before the main engines were even fully online. The Silent Claw leaped from its moorings. Kael poured every ounce of his skill into the controls, banking the ship hard to port. It was a race between his acceleration and the closing doors. He shot through the rapidly shrinking gap with only meters to spare, the ship's shields screaming as they scraped against the edge of the massive door. He was out, but he wasn't free. The security shuttles opened fire, lancing the darkness with bolts of plasma. Kael pushed the Machar ship to its limits. The Concord patrol craft were fast, but the Silent Claw was in another league entirely. It moved with an impossible grace and power, its advanced engines leaving the pursuit vessels struggling in its wake. He configured the nav computer, inputting the coordinates for the Sol system from memory. A warning flashed on his screen. Destination is within a level 9 quarantine zone. Proceed? Kael's face was a grim mask in the glow of the console. You're damn right, he whispered. He initiated the FTL drive. The stars outside the viewport warped, stretching into streaks of impossible blue and white. With a final silent flash, the Silent Claw vanished from Concord space. He was away. He was on his way home. And he was bringing hell with him. The Silent Claw ripped through the fabric of space-time, exiting the surreal tunnel of faster-than-light travel and re-emerging into the familiar quiet of the void. But this was a different quiet. It was home. Before him, distant but unmistakable, burned a single yellow-white star. Sole relief was a tidal wave, so powerful it almost brought Kael to his knees. But it was followed instantly by a cold spike of adrenaline. The ship's long-range sensors lit up. He was already being watched. The unidentified vessel, a synthesized voice crackled over the comms, speaking the clipped, efficient English of Earth's Defense Force. You have entered a restricted military zone. Identify yourself immediately or defensive measures will be taken. Kael opened a channel. EDF Traffic Control. This is Lieutenant Commander Kaelen Ryker, service number 847TZ392, formerly of the UES Odyssey. I am piloting a non-hostile alien vessel and request permission to approach Luna Base. I have critical intelligence of an imminent threat to the Sol system. The silence that followed was heavy with suspicion. After a full minute, a new voice came on, sharp and human. Unidentified vessel, this is Captain Eva Rostova of the EDF destroyer Vigilance. Lieutenant Commander Ryker was declared killed in action 3 months ago. State your true identity. Captain, it really is me, Kael insisted, his voice raw with exhaustion and urgency. The Odyssey was destroyed. I was the sole survivor. The vessel I'm piloting belongs to the race that rescued me. Every second we waste talking, Earth is in more danger. Check my voice print. Check my service number. For God's sake, check my dental records. I don't care. Just listen to me. Another tense pause. Kael could picture the frantic verification checks happening on the bridge of the Vigilance. Finally, Rostova's voice returned, her tone now laced with disbelief but stripped of its open hostility. Your voice print is a 99.7% match, Commander. Power down your weapon systems and follow our escort. Any deviation from our flight path will be met with lethal force. Welcome home. 4 of Earth's newest interceptors, sleek, dagger-shaped craft called Rapiers, peeled away from the destroyer and took up formation around the Silent Claw. Under their watchful guard, Kael began the long, tense journey toward the moon. The debriefing room at Luna Command was a cold, gray box designed for brutal honesty. Kael stood before a long table, facing the grim-faced leadership of the Earth Defense Force. At the center sat the woman from the comms, her uniform bearing the insignia of an admiral. Eva Rostova. She had iron-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and eyes that looked like they had seen too many wars. For an hour, Kael told them everything. He held nothing back this time. He told them about the Chrysalis, about their ability to assimilate, to absorb knowledge. He described the psychic violation, the way they turned his crewmates into puppets of silver and flesh. He played the 10-second audio log from his suit recorder. The blood drained from the faces of several officers in the room. When he finished, the room was silent, the only sound the faint hum of the station's life support. Admiral Rostova finally broke the silence. She looked not at Kael, but at a technician at the side of the room. Show him. The main screen behind her flickered to life. It displayed a star chart of the outer Sol system. Red icons blinked near the orbit of Neptune. 6 weeks ago, our long-range listening posts in the Kuiper Belt began picking up anomalous energy signatures, Rostova said, her voice dangerously calm. Something was masking its presence, but not perfectly. The view zoomed in. It was a grainy image from a deep space probe. Kael's blood ran cold. The shapes were unmistakable. They were void black, asymmetrical things that seemed to hurt the eyes, absorbing light rather than reflecting it. They were Chrysalis ships. They've been moving slowly, conserving energy, likely sending scouts ahead, Rostova continued, her eyes locked on Kael's. But 48 hours ago, they began to accelerate. They are on a direct intercept course for Earth. The weight of the new reality crushed the air from Kael's lungs. He wasn't a harbinger. He was just the last man to arrive at a funeral that had already been planned. How long? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. Rostova's expression was carved from granite. At their current velocity, 3 weeks. Maybe 4. The news hit the planet like a death sentence. For a day, there was panic. Then something else took over. A grim, unified resolve. For the first time in a century, the fractious governments of Earth fell silent. At an emergency session of the United Nations Security Council, a unanimous vote declared a planet-wide state of emergency, transferring ultimate authority to a unified EDF High Command under Admiral Rostova. Humanity began to prepare for its extinction. The great factories of the Ruhr Valley in the American Midwest stopped making cars and started churning out plasma repeaters and armored plating. Asteroid miners in the belt retrofitted their powerful tugs with magnetic mass drivers, turning civilian machinery into crude but powerful weapons. In the orbital shipyards above Mars, crews worked around the clock, welding new weapons onto every ship that could hold one. It was a frantic, desperate, and magnificent display of a species that refused to die quietly. Kael found himself at the epicenter of the storm. He was no longer a pilot, he was Earth's single most valuable strategic asset. He spent 20 hours a day in a high-tech lab deep within Luna Command, running on caffeine and pure will. His partner in this desperate endeavor was Dr. Aris Thorne, a lanky, wild-haired cyberneticist who looked upon the Silent Claws technology with the manic glee of a child on Christmas morning. Their energy pulse, it didn't just overload your systems, it resonated with them, harmonized with them, just enough to find their shutdown frequencies. Thorne mused, his fingers flying across a holographic interface. They don't break down the door, they ask it politely to open. Diabolical. Their goal was to reverse the process. To turn the memory of a sound, a frequency that existed only in the traumatized pathways of Kael's brain, into a weapon. They called it the resonance key, a way to unlock the Chrysalis's defenses. They worked in a simulator, trying to replicate the energy signature. Again and again, Kael had to relive the final moments of the Odyssey. One afternoon, the simulated psychic scream became too real. He stumbled back from the console, gasping for air, the ghosts of his crew swirling around him. Thorne quietly shut the system down. "Get some coffee, Commander," the scientist said gently. "The ghost can wait an hour." But they couldn't. A week later, covered in sweat and shaking from exhaustion, they found it. A single pure frequency that made the simulated Chrysalis energy field waver and distort. It was a note, the note for their key. It was a sliver of hope in an ocean of darkness. While Earth forged its sword in the dark, ripples of Kael's warning were spreading across the galaxy. Ambassador Tillis stood once more before the Concord High Chamber. This time she was not there to debate. She was the accuser. "You were given proof," she declared, her voice ringing with cold fury. "Not testimony, not theory, proof of an existential threat. And you chose to file it away, to hide behind your quarantines and your precious, cowardly protocols." She activated a hollow emitter in the center of the room. The psychic scream of the Odyssey's crew filled the chamber. Several ambassadors physically recoiled. Zilks remained impassive, but a flicker of something annoyance perhaps crossed his multifaceted eyes. "This is an emotional outburst, Ambassador, not a policy proposal," Zilks rasped. "Your theatrics are unbecoming." "Then consider this my resignation from the theater," Tillis snarled. "I will no longer be an actor in this farce. My people are warriors. We face threats. We do not build walls and pretend they don't exist. I hereby renounce my seat on this council." She turned to face the stunned assembly. "The Concord has forgotten what it means to protect. It only knows how to preserve itself. I say let it. To any of you who still believe that honor is more than a word in a treaty, that courage is more than a footnote in a history text, join me. We will stand with the humans. We will stand against the darkness. We will forge a new alliance. A free alliance." She turned and walked, her back straight, out of the high chamber. A heavy silence fell. Then one by one, others began to rise. The hulking ambassador of the Ursine-like Jakar, the crystalline delegate from the silicon-based silicates, warriors, explorers, species who had grown tired of the Concord's stagnation. They followed Talis out of the chamber, leaving a fractured, stunned, and irrevocably weakened Galactic Concord behind them. A new alliance was being born in fire. The only question was whether it would arrive in time. They arrived without warning. Not with the flash of an FTL drive, but as if the darkness itself had simply coagulated into form. One moment, the space beyond Earth's final defensive line was empty. The next, it was filled. From the bridge of the EDF flagship Vigilance, Admiral Rostova watched the tactical display turn from a clean, orderly grid into a sea of hostile red icons. At the center of the formation, dwarfing everything else, was the mothership. It wasn't a ship in any conventional sense. It was a cancerous mountain of living metal and dark chitinous plating, a kilometer-long abomination that blotted out the stars behind it. "All ships!" Rostova's voice was pure steel, cutting through the tense silence of the bridge. "Weapons free, fire at will." For Earth, the battle for humanity's survival began. Earth's fleet, a mismatched collection of hardened military destroyers and retrofitted civilian haulers, threw everything it had at the approaching tide. Plasma torpedoes streaked across the void. The massive magnetic accelerator cannons of Luna Base fired slugs of solid tungsten the size of shuttles. For a brief, glorious moment, the front line of the Chrysalis swarm faltered, smaller ships shattering under the concentrated barrage. Kael stood on the command deck, his eyes glued to the tactical feed. He saw the flaw in their fleeting success. "They're learning," he said to Rostova. "They're sending the drones in first, probing our firing patterns, tasting our defenses." He was right. The main Chrysalis fleet adjusted. They no longer flew in predictable formations. They flowed like a metallic river around Earth's projectiles, their movements fluid and unnatural. Their return fire was precise and devastating. A wing of Earth's best rapier interceptors, caught in a coordinated volley, was swatted from the sky like insects. The EDF destroyer Leonidas, its shields overwhelmed, was swarmed by smaller Chrysalis craft that latched onto its hull like leeches, tearing it apart piece by piece. The defense line began to buckle. The sheer, unending number of the enemy was a physical weight, crushing their hopes along with their hulls. Desperation began to creep into the comms chatter. "Admiral," the tactical officer reported, his voice strained, "the outer perimeter has collapsed. They've broken through its sectors Gamma and Theta. They'll be in weapons range of the orbital stations in 20 minutes. Rostova's face was a grim mask. She was about to give the order to sacrifice the garrison on Mars to pull ships back for a last hopeless defense of Earth when the long-range sensor officer cried out, "Admiral!" Unidentified FTL signatures. Massive energy readings. They're everywhere. For a heart-stopping moment, everyone on the bridge assumed it was Chrysalis reinforcements, the last nail in humanity's coffin. But these signatures were different. They were clean, sharp, powerful. Then space itself seemed to tear open. A fleet of impossible beauty and power erupted from the swirling vortexes of hyperspace. Sleek, obsidian battlecruisers with the predatory grace of the Silent Claw formed the vanguard. Behind them came the hulking, bear-like dreadnoughts of the Jakar, their armored hulls bristling with heavy cannons. Flanking them were the strange, crystalline vessels of the silicates, shimmering and refracting the light of battle like 1,000 angry diamonds. It was a fleet of a dozen different philosophies united in a single, glorious purpose. A voice, clear and strong, cut through the chaos of the EDF command channel. "Admiral Rostova, this is Ambassador Talis of the Free Alliance. Forgive our tardy arrival. We came as soon as we could." A wild, disbelieving cheer erupted on the bridge of the Vigilance. Hope, which had been all but extinguished, flared back to life with the intensity of a nova. The Free Alliance fleet slammed into the Chrysalis's flank like a thunderbolt. Mshar-phase disruptors tore through organic hulls. Jakar heavy cannons obliterated smaller ships in single volleys. The tide of the battle for a moment seemed to turn. But the tactical display updated, and the cold, hard numbers told a different story. The Free Alliance fleet was magnificent, but it was a fraction of the Chrysalis's total force. Talis's voice came again, this time on a private channel to Rostova and Kael. Admiral, our attack will break their momentum, but we cannot win a battle of attrition. We are here to buy you a single, decisive moment. Kael, are you ready? The weight of the entire war settled back onto his shoulders. Ready, Ambassador, Kael replied, his own voice steady. Hope was a luxury. A plan was a weapon. This is our only shot, Rostova said, her voice addressing the combined fleet command. The Free Alliance and all remaining EDF heavy cruisers will form a spearhead. Your target is not to destroy, but to create a corridor. Punch a hole through the swarm directly to the mothership. Commander Ryker will do the rest. The plan was insane. A suicidal charge for a 1 in a million chance. It was the most human thing Kael had ever heard. He was already in the cockpit of the Silent Claw, the ship's systems humming around him. It felt like coming home. He armed the resonance key, a specially designed torpedo mounted under the ship's nose. Make it count, Commander. Rostova's voice came over his private comm. I will, Admiral, he said. The Allied fleet reformed. It was a breathtaking sight, a wedge of mismatched, battered, but utterly determined ships, pointing like an arrow at the heart of the enemy. Then they charged. What followed was a corridor of fire. Kael pushed the Silent Claw's engines, flying in the protected wake of the Vigilance. Outside his cockpit, space was a maelstrom of light and death. He saw a Jakar dreadnought deliberately move to intercept a volley of plasma meant for the ships behind it, vanishing in a silent, brilliant fireball. He heard the comm chatter, a mix of human curses, Machar battle cries, and the strange melodic war hymns of the silicates, all united in a symphony of defiance. They were carving a path for him with their lives. He broke through the main swarm. Ahead of him loomed the mothership, a wall of darkness that filled his vision. Its own defenses began to fire, a web of energy trying to swat his tiny ship from the sky. To list now, he yelled. Clearing a path, she roared back. Her own battlecruiser and 2 others surged forward, absorbing the defensive fire, their shields glowing white-hot under the strain. It was his chance. He aimed and fired. The resonance key shot forward, a silver streak against the black hull. It struck the mothership's energy shield and did not explode. Instead, it sent a ripple across its surface, and then a section of the shield tore open. Not a hole, but a screaming, unstable tunnel of raw energy. His 90-second window. For the Odyssey, he whispered, and plunged the Silent Claw into the eye of the needle. The flight was a nightmare. The energy tunnel threatened to collapse around him at any second. Alarms blared as the ship's shields were shredded. He burst through into the interior of the mothership. It was a hellscape of pulsing organic matter, writhing cables, and glowing sacks of energy. It was a living creature. His console pointed him toward the center, toward the massive energy signature of the neural core. He flew through cavernous chambers, dodging grasping tendrils and defensive biological turrets that sprouted from the walls. He was almost there. The core was ahead, a colossal, brain-like orb of pulsing light, suspended in a web of energy conduits. He opened a channel to the fleet. Talis, Admiral Rostova, it's been an honor. He set the Silent Claw's engine to overload. This is for my crew. He aimed his ship directly at the heart of the great beast and pushed the throttle to full. On the bridge of the Vigilance, they watched Kael's tiny icon merge with the massive signature of the mothership. Then his signal vanished. For a second, nothing happened. Then a light began to glow from within the Chrysalis mothership. It grew brighter and brighter until it was as brilliant as a newborn star. The ship convulsed. Cracks of pure white energy spread across its dark hull. Then it shattered. There was no sound in the vacuum of space, but the sight was deafening. A silent, cataclysmic explosion that vaporized the heart of the Chrysalis fleet. A shock wave of light and energy radiated outwards, and as it passed over the remaining Chrysalis ships, they simply died. Their lights went out. Their movement ceased. The hive mind was severed. The Allied fleet, battered and bleeding, began methodically destroying the inert, drifting husks. A stunned silence fell over the bridge of the Vigilance, quickly replaced by a ragged, disbelieving, triumphant cheer. They had won. They had actually won. Amidst the celebration, Admiral Rostova's voice cut through. Her first order as the victor was quiet but firm. Find him. Find Commander Ryker. Now. The mood on the bridge shifted again to one of tense, hopeful searching. The Allied ships began scanning the massive debris field where the mothership had been. Minutes stretched into an eternity. The cheering died down, replaced by a heavy quiet. He was gone. The hero who had saved them all was gone. Admiral, a young ensign at a sensor station spoke up, his voice trembling. I have something. A distress beacon. Extremely weak, but it's there. Standard EDF pilot ejection system. He pointed to a blinking green dot on his screen, almost lost in the static of the debris field. A collective sigh of relief washed through the bridge, a wave of pure, unadulterated joy. Rostova allowed herself a small, tight smile. Talissa's voice came over the comm, thick with emotion. We have him in our sights, Admiral. We're bringing him home. 3 weeks after the battle, the silence was what felt most alien to Kael. He stood in the observation deck of Luna Command's medical wing, looking out at the serene blue-white jewel of Earth. The frantic energy of mobilization had been replaced by the steady, determined hum of rebuilding. Below in the docks, human engineers worked alongside mature technicians, retrofitting Earth's battered ships with Allied technology. The hiss of a door opening behind him didn't make him jump. He knew who it was without turning. It is a beautiful sight, Ambassador Tallis said, coming to stand beside him. Her formal robes were gone, replaced by the same functional uniform she had worn in the observatory. From up here, you would never know how close it came to being a dead world. The ghosts are still there, Kael said quietly. You just have to know where to listen. The bandages were gone from his arms and torso, but he knew other scars would never fade. Ghosts are the price of survival, Commander, Tallis replied gently. They remind us what we fight for. She paused. The Free Alliance Charter was formally ratified yesterday. Earth is named as a founding member, recognized by a trial by fire. Your species has made an impression. Kael allowed himself a small, tired smile. We're good at that. Humanity's greatest skill has always been figuring out how to survive its own extinction. It is not just survival, Tallis corrected him, her golden eyes serious. It is defiance, a quality the Concord had long forgotten. They saw you as a primitive race. They failed to understand that a cornered animal is the most dangerous kind of warrior. And the Concord? When Kael asked, what's the fallout from their inaction? Talissa's whiskers twitched with something that might have been grim satisfaction. Chaos, the kind they feared so much. My defection, along with the Jakar and the silicates, was a crack in their foundation. But your victory and the proof that the Chrysalis could be defeated, that shattered it. Dozens of other worlds are now petitioning to leave the Concord and join us. They see that the old way, the path of cautious containment, is a slow suicide. We offered a new way, a spear. The old order, the one that had stood for 12,000 years, was crumbling. Not from an external attack, but from its own internal rot, exposed to the light by a single desperate human and the alliance he had inspired. They had not just won a battle for Earth, they had started a galactic reformation. As Tallis was about to continue, Kael's personal comm chimed. He looked at the screen. It was a priority call from Admiral Rostova. Commander, the Admiral's voice was crisp, I am patching through a Priority 1 communique. It's unexpected. Who is it from, Admiral? The former chairman of the Concord High Council. Zilks. A holographic image shimmered into existence before them. Zilks appeared, not on the grand dais of the High Chamber, but in what looked like a stark, private study. Without the trappings of his office, he looked smaller, older. He focused his multifaceted eyes on Kael. There was no anger, only the cold, analytical light of a being forced to confront a flawed calculation. Commander Ryker, his synthesized voice rasped. It was the first time he had used Kael's name. My government has requested I tender a formal apology for the Concord's failure to act. He paused, a strange gesture that might have been a Hadari sigh. That is a political necessity. I will offer you a practical one instead. An admission. He continued, our models are the most advanced in the galaxy. They have predicted the course of empires and the fall of stars. They predicted the loss of your world as a statistical certainty, but they failed to account for a critical variable. And what was that? Kael asked. You, Zilk stated simply. Not you as an individual, but what you represent. The capacity for irrational, focused violence in the face of absolute annihilation. An illogical refusal to accept a logical outcome. It is a remarkable and terrifying quality. We calculated the odds. We did not calculate the will. It was the closest Kael knew he would ever get to an apology. The fleet you destroyed, Zilks went on, his tone shifting, becoming a warning. Our long-range observations showed it was a vanguard, a scouting swarm sent to test the galaxy's defenses. It found them wanting. By destroying it, you have not ended the threat. You have merely announced our presence to it. The former chairman leaned closer to his hollow emitter. The main body of the Chrysalis still sleeps in the dark between galaxies. In our caution, we merely observe them. Now you have woken them up. The next time they come, they will not send a scouting party. Be ready. The transmission ended, leaving Kael and Talis in a heavy silence. A month later, Kael stood on the bridge of Earth's newest, most advanced vessel. In a ceremony attended by delegates from across the Free Alliance, she had been christened the Odyssey II. He wore a crisp new EDF uniform. On his chest, next to his human medals, was a small silver insignia, the emblem of the Free Alliance. He wasn't a lieutenant commander anymore. He was simply Commander Kaelen Ryker, special envoy to the Free Alliance fleet. He looked out the main viewport. Earth hung before him, a vibrant swirl of blue, white, and green. Beside it hung the Machar battlecruiser commanded by Talis. Farther out, Jakar and silicate ships held formation. It was a new dawn, one forged in fire and desperation. The ghosts of the first Odyssey were still with him. He knew they always would be. But standing here, watching a human ship patrol alongside its new, powerful allies, he felt a change. The voices in his memory were no longer screaming. They were quiet. They were at peace. They were standing watch with him.